Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we work together to squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the first in a 13-part series as we meander through Harry Potter and the something-something Phoenix something. Doesn't matter what it's actually called because the titles are all garbage. Now, what happened in the first 3 chapters of this book? In Chapter 1, Harry Potter listens to the news, expecting to hear something about himself, which is a hallmark of schizophrenia. And then a loud noise happens. Seriously, 20 pages, that's all that happens. Chapter 2, Harry runs into Dudley and the Dementors, and we have the return of the Fig. And then hell breaks loose in the kitchen. And in Chapter 3, Harry is sprung from his bedroomly prison, and we are introduced to some new characters. Now, I would like to start with the first paragraph of the first chapter, which reads as such. The hottest day of the summer so far was drawing to a close, and a drowsy silence lay over the large square house of Privet Drive. Cars that were usually gleaming stood dusty in their drives, and lawns that were once emerald green lay parched and yellowing. The use of housepipes had been banned due to drought. Deprived of their usual car washing and lawn mowing pursuits, the inhabitants of Privet Drive had retreated into the shade of their cool houses, windows thrown wide in hopes of tempting a non-existent breeze. The only person left outdoors was a teenage boy who lay flat on his back in a flower bed outside number 4. This paragraph is a very good example of starting wide and zooming in. We get the season, summer, the place, Privet Drive, then we get specific events, the banning of hoses and the use of water due to a drought, and then we get our subject. Stephen King said that an opening line should invite the reader to begin the story. It should say, listen, come here, you want to know about this. And I think that this opening paragraph does a very good job of that, but I think that it is also a little bit maybe wasted by the very next chapter, or the very next paragraph, jumping into a reintroduction of what Harry Potter looks like, which if by book 5 you don't have a mental image, I think you're maybe not doing it right. Now, perhaps this is to introduce readers to whom this is their first exposure to Harry Potter, to the character of Harry Potter, but you would have a hard time selling me on that. Another thing is I think that this is a very good paragraph. I've said oftentimes, I believe through this series, that J.K. Rowling's writing reminds me of Stephen King's writing, and I think that you will often be able to find a writer's influences in their writing, but I will compare this first chapter to a couple chapters from a Stephen King novel which is in the news now because of a recent movie readaptation, and that is It. So we have this as the first chapter from It. The terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did end, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter, swollen with rain. Now that is another example of starting wide with an idea and zooming into this very, very small and very, very specific visual. And this is another paragraph on page 24 of It that I think really, from this paragraph you can really see some other writers such as J.K. Rowling, and it would be nearly miraculous for a writer to have emerged. When did J.K. Rowling emerge? 96 maybe, something like that. It would be spectacular for a writer to emerge in pop culture in the current age without having or drawing some inspiration from Stephen King, simply because Stephen King is so massive, right? Stephen King is published and published and published and published and published. He cranks out 10 novels a year, it seems. And these aren't small novels. But from page 24 of It, when the Falcon was opened in 1973, Elmer Curdy thought his clientele would consist mostly of bus riders. The terminal next door was serviced three different lines: Trailways, Greyhound, and Aroostook County. What he failed to realize was how many of the passengers who ride buses are women or families with small children in tow. Many of the others kept their bottles in brown bags and never got off the bus at all. Those who did were usually soldiers or sailors who wanted no more than a quick beer or two. You couldn't very well go on a bender during a 10-minute rest stop. Now, the thing that strikes me about this type of writing is that it is third person, and it is very distant in that sense, but there is a very close psychic distance, right? A third-person narrator able to tell you what these people are thinking is a trick that, as a writer, is fairly difficult to pull off. A little bit later, we have Dudley being known as Big D, which makes me very uncomfortable. And we get the scene where Harry bullies Dudley, and we're forced to wonder, is Harry a worthy hero? In this bullying, Harry resorts to fat shaming. And as an American, the term Big D reminds me of Dallas, Texas, right? It's hard to escape that thought when reading the term Big D as an American. So is this J.K. Rowling USA shaming? I think so. Now we have the return of the Fig, and I made a prediction about Fig somewhere in the series, and I tried to go back and find it, but as always, I am not allowed to really read the comments to these videos because things would be spoilers that were discussed in the comments, and I won't read the comments of this video either. So if you want to discuss spoilers, that is the place to do so. And if there's something about the series you want to contact me about directly, hit me up on Twitter at AdrianAnyway or at StripCover. But be mindful of spoilers because, again, I'm making my way through this for the first time. Anyway, I couldn't go back. I went back to try to find what I had said about Fig, but I couldn't. And I imagine that video would be very easy to find by the comment section. So if anyone out there is particularly interested in what I had said or wants to help the show out by figuring it out and reciting it to me, I would appreciate that. But there's a couple things about her being a squib that I find interesting. Squib, is that the right term, I think? Someone who converted to magic, if that's correct. Again, I'm making my way through this for the first time, so correct me if necessary. Now I had a boss at one time who was born into a devoutly Christian family, and something that I found interesting that he had told me was the fact that his wife converted to Christianity, which meant that she was and would always be much closer to the faith than he was. And I found that interesting, and he said that when it's something that you've always known, you don't really put the thoughts or the care into it that would be necessary to carry it closest to heart. So the fact that Fig is a squib, I think that is very realistic that she gets so mad at Mundungus Fletcher, who was, to my knowledge and to my assumptions, born into magic. So him being so close to the magic, well, you know, sometimes you don't always carry through with things. But Fig is very rigid about the expectations, about what should and should not happen. Moving on, that character of Mundungus Fletcher, there's a quote on 23 here, which I think this is something that I've sort of poked this about before, this series and the author possibly. I'm not going to be able to find it now. I should have. Oh yeah, keep your airnet on. Keep your airnet on. This is, once again, J.K. Rowling using a flawed character as someone who has a different British accent than herself. Is this a case of classic English classicism? You have a different accent, which illustrates that I am better and higher up in society than you, and you are probably a screw-up. It seems that we get that time and again through this series. Someone being flawed who has just a little bit of a funnier English accent than could be expected, and that is very clear. It is made very clear in speech patterns because no one else's accent is accentualized in their dialogue. So in chapter 2, we get an example of something that I think keeps Harry Potter from being very literary. And this is the way that Harry handles the Dursleys. When the Dursleys have him cornered in the kitchen and he's getting it from all sides, he's got this little line, "Get out of my way or I'll curse you," something like that. And what this does is this really lulls the reader into siding with Harry Potter, because he is our protagonist. But the Dursleys, from their perspective, really are acting pretty logically. They don't know what's going on at that point. Harry Potter has dragged their son home, who's unconscious and basically crying about Harry Potter having magicked him. So it is realistic to want an explanation for this. Instead, Harry Potter jumps straight to the threat of violence, and not just violence, but violence via the one thing that makes him different than them. This is not literary. Just think of, okay, so Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be. What is this? This is a moment of cold and distant contemplation. This is a moment of the gray. This is a moment where someone is being forced to contemplate worth, value. The gray is where literature exists. The gray is what makes literature literature. The gray is where the reader is forced to question his or herself. What would I do in this instance? And we don't really get that here. We get straight to, well, I'll curse you. I'll curse you if you don't get out of my way. And then everyone's scared of Harry Potter, right? The big bad guy on campus. But literature really does live in the gray. Literature lives in the places where we are forced to examine the self. We are forced to question our own thoughts, our own thought processes, whether or not we could or would act in these situations. And we are stripped of that in this. And the last point I have for these first 3 chapters, Nymphadora? Nymphadora? Really? Nymphadora. That's what we're going with. Also, she's a pervert. Let's see, where are we at here? And I am assuming that this won't come as a revelation to any of you, because I'm guessing this is very much where her character goes. But nice one, Mad Eye, said Tonks, appreciatively staring at Harry's midriff. This is not a good person. This is not someone that we should be reading about in children's literature. That is all I have for this installment of the Harry Potter series. Again, if you would like to discuss spoilers, the comment section will probably be full of them, and I expect that to be what's going on down there. I would appreciate it if you hit the like button, and if you have not already subscribed, maybe do so.